Hey everybody, my name is Damon Knight. Welcome to my channel and to our ongoing A Complete Noob's Guide to Astrophotography series. As always, if you haven't already, I really recommend you go back and check out some of the other videos leading up to this one. Lots of useful background information that I suspect will just make things make more sense in general. Today, we are going to be talking about filters. We're going to talk about what they do and some of the terminology and concepts that you'll need to understand. There will be a whole other filter video sometime in the future that's going to be more about the different physical types of filters, as in, clip-in, mounted, unmounted, where they install in your rig and things like that. But to keep this video a little bit shorter and from getting too dense, we're not going to cover that right here. Uh, so the filters that you're going to be able to use or want to use will depend on what kind of camera you have, how dark your skies are, and what kind of target you're going to be shooting. There are two kind of major categories of filters and a couple of minor ones. At least I call them minor ones. The major categories are broadband and narrowband, and then there are, IR filters and UV filters and light pollution filters in kind of the minor category. Broadband filters, generally used with mono cameras, and they're going to be like luminance, red, green, and blue. Each one of those filters only allows that particular color of light through them, with luminance basically being, all of the light. They're called broadband because they allow a very broad spectrum of light through, as the name implies. They can be used pretty much any kind of target, whatever you're shooting. And our RGB filters, LRGB filters will work, but because of the broad spectrum of light they let through, they're not always the best choice of filter. Narrowband filters come in a whole bunch of different varieties. Some are intended for color cameras. You can get like dual narrowband filters and tri-band filters, some are for mono cameras, and the mono cameras tend to just be, instead of dual or tri, they're one band. The most commonly used narrowband filters that you'll see are hydrogen alpha, which you'll just see as like HA, oxygen 3, which would be listed as O, and then kind of the Roman numeral for 3, and sulfur 2, which would be S2. And as, again, the name implies, they allow in a very narrow spectrum of light. I'm even wearing my silly narrowband shirt, but right, the idea here is to represent the narrow band of light that those filters let through. Those filters the narrowband filters in general, are much more target specific. Not all objects emit light in those relevant spectrums, and so they're generally only used for what are called emission nebula. In this picture behind me, actually, if you look at those red blotches in this galaxy, those red blotches are generally, those are from my hydrogen alpha filter, kind of pulling out some nebula in that galaxy. The rest of it is just, red, green, and blue filters. But, like I said, they're really fantastic for bringing out those details that would get kind of lost in the broad spectrum of RGB. So actually, while we're talking about it, this is going to be in our next category here. So let's talk about those minor categories. These are generally only used with color cameras, not with mono. There are infrared filters, which usually come in either cut or pass, which basically means cut, blocks infrared, and pass allows some infrared through. There are ultraviolet filters, which block ultraviolet. Honestly, those are super, super niche, and you are unlikely to need them, so I won't go into any more on that. And then there are light pollution filters, which is what this guy here is. And these are special filters designed for folks in areas with kind of high levels of light pollution. And that's, if you live in a big city or around a big city with lots of lights all the time, and you notice it never actually gets particularly like pitch black dark, you probably are dealing with light pollution. Light pollution filters like this are quite popular. That said, there is a lot of debate for how useful they are, whether or not they actually work. It's kind of complicated, but basically, these filter out specific frequencies of light, certain spectrums of light, and in order for that to be effective, your light pollution has to fall in those spectrums, and depending on the types of lights in your area, it may or may not work for you. It's a whole thing. There are, of course, also a whole other bunch of specialized types of filters. There are ones people get like specifically for taking pictures of like Venus and specific other planets that are useful because of their particular composition. There's also like hydrogen beta and nitrogen filters and things like that. They're way, way, way less common. And we're not going to go into details about all that stuff now. So now you have a rough idea of what the basic categories are. There are a couple of just kind of last thoughts that I wanted to share before we wrap up this video. First, if you are using a color camera, you do not need filters to do astrophotography. You can absolutely take pictures with what you have. Filters are there to make your pictures better. But they're not necessary. I mean, I guess unless you're, again, trying to photograph really, really specific things. But for general astrophotography, you can just use an unfiltered color camera, and you can get a lot of perfectly good results. It will be harder if you're in a highly light polluted area, but you can still absolutely do it. I bring this up because filters are really expensive. The fancier and better they get, the more expensive they are. So don't feel like you have to rush out immediately. I really would just start, if you're using a color camera, just try without, see how it goes, and then you can kind of decide whether or not you want to make that investment. And second, and this is one that I somewhat embarrassingly had you questioned even myself in the early days, so I figured this is good for me to just toss out there, which is you can't stack filters, right? That means you can't put a light pollution filter and a narrowband filter together, or like a dual band filter if you're doing that at the same time, one at a time. Technically, depending on how your rig is set up, it might be physically possible to do, but there's really no point in doing that, right? Because a narrowband filter or dual narrowband filter lets in such small spectrums of light, you effectively already have light pollution handled. If you're shooting mono, you have LRGB, right? Again, you're letting in just one color of light, so stacking them is just not a thing. I felt a little bit silly, but when you're just getting started, it seems like a thing that would make sense. So yeah, that's kind of a quick and easy primer on the different main types of filters that you are going to run into or see people talking about. You'll also frequently see broadband as just BB or narrowband as NB, throwing that out so you recognize those terms. Again, there is going to be a more detailed one on the video on the types of filters physically. For example, this guy here is a clip-in, and there's like mounted and unmounted, but that's for another time. In the next video, we're going to get into some of the practicalities of actually taking astrophotography pictures. I know it's been a whole lot of theory and me just telling you stuff, to learn, to know how it all works. But next time we are actually gonna start talking about, how you go about taking those astrophotography pictures. So I'm very excited about that. We're not done with the learning and the teaching, but we're going to mix it up a little bit for this next video. So thank you very much for watching, and yeah, I hope to see you again next video.